My husband's family lied about his brother's paternity. Now his mom is trying to manipulate me into keeping the secret. I never thought I'd find myself in the middle of someone else's secret. If there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that family secrets always find a way of surfacing, no matter how much time has passed. It started out like any other family gathering, but by the end of the night, my entire perspective on my husband's family had shifted forever. Let me back up. My name is Emily, and I've been married to my husband, Jake, for 6 years. We've always been close to his family, particularly his mom, Sharon, who's pretty much the matriarch of their tight-knit household. Jake and I don't have kids yet, but his younger brother, Matt, does. 2 little girls with his wife, Sarah. On the surface, everything seemed picture-perfect with them. Matt and Jake were raised in the same house, had the same upbringing, and were only 2 years apart in age, so they've always been close. But there's one major difference. Matt is nothing like the rest of his family. Jake and his parents are all pretty laid back, quiet, and reserved. Matt, on the other hand, is loud, overly confident, and honestly, sometimes pretty arrogant. I've always chalked it up to him being the youngest and a little spoiled, but now I know it's much deeper than that. It all started at a family dinner last month. We were celebrating Jake's birthday at his parents' house, and everyone was there, Jake's parents, Matt and Sarah, and their 2 kids. Sharon had made her usual elaborate spread, and everyone was laughing and catching up. About halfway through dinner, Matt stepped out to take a phone call, and that's when everything started to unravel. Sharon had a bit too much wine, and out of nowhere, she leaned across the table toward me and said in a low voice, "I need to tell you something." I could tell by the tone in her voice that this wasn't going to be a light-hearted comment. I glanced at Jake, who was talking with his dad, completely unaware of what was happening. I didn't know what to expect, but I was not prepared for what came next. "Matt, he's not Jake's full brother," Sharon whispered, her eyes darting around the room to make sure no one else was listening. I stared at her, completely confused. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice down as well. She sighed and took another sip of her wine before explaining. "Matt, he's not Bob's son. Bob is Jake and Matt's dad, or so I thought." I felt my stomach drop. "Wait, what? You're saying Matt has a different dad?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I could feel the weight of the secret settling in, and I didn't like it. Sharon nodded slowly. "Yes, I had an affair a long time ago, and Matt is the result of that affair. Bob doesn't know, Matt doesn't know, no one knows, except for me. And now, you—" I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing. How could something like this be hidden for so long? Matt is 32 years old, and in all that time no one had ever suspected anything? I glanced around the table again, my eyes landing on Jake, who was completely oblivious to the bombshell his mother had just dropped on me. "I need you to promise me something, Emily," Sharon said, her voice urgent now. "You can't tell Jake. You can't tell anyone. It would destroy this family." I didn't know what to say. I had just been handed a secret that could tear this entire family apart, and now I was supposed to just carry it around with me? I could barely process it myself, let alone figure out how to keep it from my husband. I don't know if I can keep that from Jake," I stammered, feeling overwhelmed. "You have to," Sharon insisted. "Please, for the sake of the family. We've made it this far without anyone finding out. It doesn't have to change anything." But it did change everything. Suddenly, Matt's brash personality made a little more sense. His confidence, his constant need for attention. It wasn't just him being the baby of the family. It was him, unknowingly, trying to fit into a family that he wasn't fully part of, at least by blood. My heart ached for him, but at the same time, I was furious. How could Sharon keep something like this from him, from Jake, from Bob? How had she lived with this for over 30 years? I managed to get through the rest of dinner without falling apart, but as soon as Jake and I got in the car to go home, I felt the weight of the secret pressing down on me. I couldn't look at him the same way, knowing that his entire understanding of his family was built on a lie. But I didn't know how to tell him, or if I even should. The next few days were a blur. I felt like I was walking around in a fog trying to process what I had learned. Every time Jake would talk about his family or mention Matt, I would tense up, afraid that I would accidentally spill the truth. I didn't want to be the one to break this to him, but at the same time, I didn't know if I could keep it to myself. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, Sharon called me. "Emily, we need to talk," she said, her voice sounding much more sober than the last time we spoke. "I hope you've had time to think about what I told you." "Yeah," I said, my heart pounding. "I've thought about it a lot." "And?" she pressed, waiting for me to say something, but I wasn't sure what she expected me to say. "And I don't know if I can keep this from Jake," I admitted. "It doesn't feel right." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost feel Sharon's anger brewing. "You have to keep this secret, Emily," she said, her voice cold now. "You don't understand what's at stake here." "I think I do," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "But I also think Jake deserves to know the truth. Do you really want to be the one to ruin his relationship with his brother, with his father? Do you really want to be responsible for tearing this family apart?" Sharon's words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I stood my ground. "It's not my secret to keep, Sharon. I don't know if I can do this." "Well, you better figure it out," she snapped, "because if you tell Jake, you'll destroy everything." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. This wasn't just about Sharon's mistake anymore. It was about whether or not I was willing to carry this burden for the rest of my life, and honestly, I didn't know if I could. The days following that phone call with Sharon were some of the hardest I've experienced in my marriage. I felt trapped, caught between my loyalty to Jake and the overwhelming guilt that I was now carrying Sharon's secret. I couldn't look at Matt the same way anymore either. Every time he called or texted Jake, I felt sick to my stomach. The thought of Matt being in the dark about something so fundamental to his identity made me feel like I was somehow betraying him too. Jake, of course, had no idea what was going on. He'd ask me if I was okay, noticing my distracted mood, but I always brushed him off with some excuse about work stress or not feeling well. I could tell he was starting to get worried. But how was I supposed to explain to him that his entire family was built on a lie? One evening, about a week after the dinner, Jake and I were sitting on the couch watching TV when he turned to me, his brow furrowed with concern. "Emily, seriously, what's going on? You've been distant all week. Did I do something wrong?" My heart clenched. He looked so worried, and here I was sitting on a secret that would completely shatter his world. I couldn't lie to him anymore, but I also couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. "Not yet." "It's not you, Jake," I said softly, reaching for his hand. "I've just had a lot on my mind lately." "Like what?" he pressed, his eyes searching mine for answers. I hesitated. This was my moment, my chance to tell him everything. But the words caught in my throat. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I stopped, shaking my head. "It's nothing, really. I think I'm just stressed out." Jake didn't look convinced, but he didn't push me any further. Instead, he pulled me into a hug and said, "You know you can tell me anything, right?" The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. I nodded, burying my face in his chest, feeling even more guilty for not telling him the truth. That night, as I lay awake next to him, I made a decision. I couldn't keep this secret any longer. But instead of going directly to Jake, I needed to talk to Matt. I needed to know if he had any idea about his real father before I dropped this bombshell on Jake. It didn't seem fair to tell Jake without giving Matt a chance to hear it first, especially since it was his life that would be most affected by it. The next day, I texted Matt and asked if we could meet up. He seemed surprised, but he agreed to grab coffee with me the following afternoon. I didn't tell Jake about the meeting because I wasn't sure how he would react, and I didn't want to get his hopes up or make him suspicious before I had all the information. When I arrived at the coffee shop, my nerves were through the roof. Matt was already there, sipping on an iced coffee, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and smiled when he saw me, completely unaware that his life was about to be turned upside down. "Hey, Emily," he greeted me, standing up to give me a quick hug. "What's up? This is a surprise," I forced a smile as I sat down across from him, my hands shaking slightly. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about something important. Matt's smile faded a little and he looked at me with concern. Okay? What's going on? Is everything all right? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Matt, has there ever been anything unusual that you've noticed about your family? Anything that didn't quite add up? He frowned, clearly confused. What do you mean? Unusual? Like what? I hesitated again, unsure of how to approach the topic delicately. But there was no easy way to say it. Has there ever been any doubt in your mind that Bob is your biological father? Matt blinked at me, completely taken aback by the question. What? No, of course not. Why would you ask that? I could see the confusion and slight irritation on his face, but I had to push through. The reason I'm asking is because Sharon told me something she's kept secret for a long time. Matt, Bob isn't your biological father. Matt stared at me, his expression frozen in disbelief. He didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he shook his head, laughing slightly, though there was no humor in it. What the hell are you talking about, Emily? I know it sounds crazy, but Sharon told me herself. She had an affair, and you're the result of that affair. She never told anyone. Not Bob, not Jake, not even you. Matt's face went pale, and I could see his hands trembling as he gripped his coffee cup. That's impossible, he muttered, more to himself than to me. You're wrong. There's no way. I wish I was wrong, Matt, I said softly, feeling the weight of the revelation pressing down on both of us. But Sharon admitted it. She begged me not to tell Jake, not to tell anyone. But I couldn't keep this from you. You deserve to know the truth. Matt sat there in stunned silence, his eyes glazed over as he processed what I had just told him. After a few moments, he looked up at me, his voice barely above a whisper. Does Jake know? I shook my head. No, not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. I didn't think it was fair to tell him before you had a chance to process everything. He ran a hand through his hair, looking completely shell-shocked. I don't even know what to say, he muttered. My whole life. It's been a lie? I reached out to place a hand on his arm, trying to offer some comfort, but I could see the pain in his eyes. This wasn't something I could fix with words. I'm so sorry, Matt, I whispered. I wish there was an easier way to do this. Matt didn't respond for a long time. He just stared down at the table, his mind clearly racing. Finally, he looked up at me, his expression a mixture of anger and heartbreak. I need to talk to my mom. Matt stormed out of the coffee shop so fast I barely had time to catch up with him. He was livid, his face flushed red, his jaw clenched tightly. I could feel the tension radiating off him as we walked out into the parking lot, and I wasn't sure what to say to calm him down. Honestly, I didn't know if there was anything I could say to make this situation better. Matt, wait, I called after him, grabbing his arm to slow him down. You need to take a minute before you confront her. You're upset, and I get it, but... He cut me off, his eyes flashing with anger. Of course I'm upset. My entire life has been a goddamn lie, Emily, and I've been walking around like a clueless idiot. I'm going to see my mom, and she's going to explain this to me right now. I could see there was no point in arguing. Matt was determined to get answers, and honestly, I couldn't blame him. If I were in his shoes, I'd probably be doing the same thing. But there was something about the way he was handling it that made me nervous. I didn't know how Sharon would react, and the last thing I wanted was to make things even worse than they already were. Okay, but just be careful, I said softly. This is going to be hard for both of you. Matt didn't respond. He just nodded tightly and climbed into his car. I watched him speed off, my stomach churning with anxiety. I had no idea how this was going to play out, but I had a feeling it wasn't going to end well. A few hours later, I was at home, nervously pacing the living room, waiting for Jake to get home from work. My phone buzzed and I immediately grabbed it, hoping it was Matt with an update. Instead, it was Sharon. The message was short, but enough to send a chill down my spine. "I know you told Matt. This is all your fault." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Sharon was clearly furious with me, and I couldn't say I was surprised. I'd known from the moment she told me her secret that this was going to blow up in my face eventually, but seeing it spelled out like that still made me feel sick. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. Instead, I sat down on the couch, my mind spinning with all the possibilities of what could be happening right now. Was Matt confronting Sharon? Was she denying everything? Would this secret tear the family apart just like Sharon had feared? Jake walked in the door a little while later, completely oblivious to the chaos swirling around his family. He smiled when he saw me, but the moment he looked at my face, his expression shifted. "Emily, what's wrong?" I didn't know how to answer him. The truth was sitting on the tip of my tongue, but I was frozen, caught between my loyalty to Jake and the guilt of knowing I'd already unleashed a storm by telling Matt. I started, but before I could say another word, Jake's phone rang. It was Matt. Jake answered, and I could hear Matt's voice on the other end, frantic and filled with anger. Jake's face fell as he listened, his brows knitting together in confusion and concern. "What do you mean?" Jake said into the phone, his voice tight. "What are you talking about?" I could hear Matt's voice getting louder, but I couldn't make out the exact words. Jake's face went pale, and he shot me a glance that made my stomach drop. "Emily," Jake said slowly, his eyes narrowing as he listened to whatever Matt was telling him on the other end. "What is Matt talking about?" I felt like the room was spinning. There was no escaping it now. The secret was out, and there was no way to take it back. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as I prepared myself to finally tell Jake the truth. "Matt found out something about your mom," I said cautiously, trying to figure out how to ease him into it. But there was no easy way. I had to just rip the Band-Aid off. "Your mom told me a secret, Jake. A big one, and I told Matt." Jake's face went from confusion to disbelief. "A secret? What kind of secret, Emily? Why the hell would you tell Matt before telling me?" I could hear the hurt in his voice, and it broke my heart. But I couldn't stop now. I had to tell him everything. "Jake, Matt isn't your full brother," I said, my voice shaking. "Sharon had an affair, and Matt's real father isn't Bob." Jake just stared at me, his mouth hanging open in shock. For a moment, I thought he was going to deny it, tell me I must have misunderstood. But then he sank down onto the couch, his hands gripping his hair. "What the hell are you talking about?" he whispered, more to himself than to me. "I'm sorry," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "I didn't know what to do. Sharon told me during dinner last week, and she begged me not to say anything. But I couldn't keep it from Matt. He deserved to know." Jake's hands were shaking as he ran them through his hair again. "I can't believe this. My whole life. This has been a lie?" I sat down next to him, reaching out to touch his arm, but he pulled away, his eyes filled with hurt and confusion. "And you kept this from me for a week?" he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't know how to tell you," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, you did," Jake snapped, his face hardening with anger. "You hurt me by not telling me. You should have told me the moment you found out, Emily. I'm your husband. You're supposed to trust me." Tears spilled down my cheeks as I tried to explain. "I do trust you, Jake. I was trying to protect you. I didn't want to blow up your family, but Matt deserved to know the truth, and I thought it was the right thing to do." "The right thing to do?" Jake repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is a mess, Emily. A complete mess." I could see the pain in his eyes, and it tore me apart. He wasn't just angry at me. He was devastated by what he'd just learned about his family. Before either of us could say another word, Jake's phone rang again. This time it was Sharon. He glanced at the screen, then looked at me with a mixture of anger and hurt before he answered. "Mom," he said, his voice tense. "What the hell is going on?" I could hear Sharon's voice on the other end, and it sounded panicked. She was talking fast, trying to explain herself, but Jake wasn't having it. He stood up, pacing the room as he listened to her, his face growing darker with every word. "You lied to me for 30 years, Mom," he finally said, his voice cold. "How could you do that? How could you keep something like this from me? From Dad? From Matt?" Sharon's voice grew more desperate, and I could hear her saying something about how she had no choice, how she did it to protect the family. But Jake wasn't having it. "Don't put this on me, Mom," he snapped. "This is your mess. You're the one who lied. You're the one who needs to fix it." Jake hung up the phone after a terse exchange with Sharon, and the silence in our living room was deafening. He stood there for a moment, staring at his phone, his chest rising and falling with deep, angry breaths. I watched him, feeling helpless and heartbroken. I wanted to reach out to him, to comfort him, but I knew he needed space. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. "She wants us to come over. She wants to explain everything, like that's going to make this any better." I swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. "Do you want to go?" I asked quietly, trying to gauge where his head was at. Jake let out a bitter laugh. "I don't know what I want. Part of me wants to go over there and scream at her until she realizes how much she's messed up our lives, and part of me wants to just walk away and never speak to her again." I could see the turmoil in his eyes, the anger mixing with the deep hurt of betrayal. He was caught in the same impossible place I had been after Sharon told me the truth, stuck between loyalty to family and the weight of a secret that had shattered everything he thought he knew. "I'll go with you if you want," I offered, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake didn't answer right away. He just stared at the wall, his jaw tight before finally nodding. "Yeah, let's just get this over with." The drive to his parents' house was tense, with neither of us speaking. Jake's grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled, and I could feel the storm of emotions radiating off him. I didn't know how this confrontation would go, but I had a sinking feeling that things were about to get much worse before they got any better. When we pulled up to the house, Matt's car was already there. I wasn't surprised. He had probably been there for a while, demanding answers from Sharon. Jake parked the car, but neither of us moved to get out right away. He just sat there, staring at the house, his face a mask of cold anger. "You ready?" I asked gently, breaking the silence. Jake nodded, though he didn't look ready at all. We both got out of the car, and as we walked up to the front door, I could hear raised voices inside. Matt was yelling, and Sharon's voice, though quieter, sounded panicked and tearful. The tension in the air was palpable as Jake pushed open the door and we stepped inside. The scene in the living room was even worse than I'd imagined. Matt was pacing back and forth, his face red and furious, while Sharon sat on the couch, her face streaked with tears. Bob, poor, oblivious Bob, was standing off to the side, looking completely lost. He clearly didn't understand what was going on yet. Matt stopped pacing when he saw us, his eyes locking onto Jake with a look of pure desperation. "Jake, did you know about this?" he demanded, his voice raw with emotion. Jake shook his head slowly, his face hardening. "No, I just found out." Matt let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair. "So we've both been living in a lie. Great." Sharon looked up then, her tear-filled eyes landing on Jake. "Honey, please, Don't," Jake snapped, cutting her off. His voice was cold, so unlike the way he usually spoke to her. "Don't you dare try to explain this away. You lied to us, Mom. You lied for over 30 years. Do you even understand what you've done?" Sharon's tears spilled over again, and she covered her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I was young, and it was a mistake. I didn't want to lose your father. I didn't know what to do. I thought it was better this way." "Better?" Matt yelled, his voice cracking. "Better for who, Mom? You? This is your mess. You've been lying to all of us, and now we have to deal with the fallout." Bob, who had been silent up until now, finally stepped forward, his voice shaky. "Wait a minute. What's going on? What are you all talking about?" The room went completely still. For a moment, no one said anything. Bob looked around at all of us, his confusion deepening. He had no idea that his entire life was about to change too. Jake was the one who finally broke the silence, his voice flat and emotionless. "Dad, Matt isn't your biological son." Bob blinked, his face going pale. "What?" Sharon let out a strangled sob, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry, Bob," she cried. "I had an affair, and Matt, he's not yours. I'm so sorry." Bob just stood there, staring at her like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. Finally, he sank down onto the nearest chair, his face drained of all color. I don't understand. How could this happen?" Sharon tried to reach for him, but he flinched away, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and pain. "Bob, please," she whispered. "It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I didn't want to hurt you." "You didn't want to hurt me?" Bob repeated, his voice hollow. "You lied to me for 30 years, Sharon. How could you do this to me? How could you let me raise a child that wasn't mine without ever telling me the truth?" Matt let out a bitter laugh, his voice filled with venom. "Join the club, Dad. I didn't know either." The room descended into chaos after that. Sharon was sobbing uncontrollably. Bob looked like he was in shock, and Matt kept pacing, shouting about how he deserved to know who his real father was. Jake stood there, stone-faced, watching his family crumble around him. I wanted to reach out to him, to comfort him somehow, but I didn't know how. This was a storm I couldn't fix. After what felt like an eternity, Jake finally spoke, his voice eerily calm. "You need to tell Matt who his father is," he said to Sharon, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "He deserves to know." Sharon sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know where he is. We haven't spoken since Matt was born." Matt's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're kidding me. You don't know who my father is? What the hell, Mom?" Sharon shook her head, her face crumpling again. "I'm sorry, Matt. I'm so sorry. I don't know where he is. I never thought this day would come." Matt let out a frustrated growl, running his hands through his hair. "This is insane. I need to get out of here." He turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the now eerily quiet living room. Sharon sat there sobbing while Bob stared blankly ahead, still in shock. Jake stood there for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then without a word, he turned and walked out the door too, leaving me standing there, unsure of what to do next. I followed him out to the car, my heart heavy. He was already in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I climbed in beside him, the silence between us thick with tension. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, my voice trembling. Jake didn't respond right away. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and broken. "There's nothing to say. My family's broken, Emily, and I don't know if we'll ever be able to fix it." The ride home was the longest, most painful silence I've ever experienced. Jake didn't say a word, and I didn't know what to say either. What could I possibly say to make this better? His family had just imploded in front of his eyes, and I'd been the one who set it all in motion. I kept stealing glances at him, hoping for some kind of sign that he wasn't completely shutting down, but his expression remained cold and distant. It scared me. When we got home, Jake immediately went upstairs, leaving me standing in the hallway, unsure of what to do next. I debated whether or not to follow him, but something told me he needed space. I didn't want to push him, not when everything was still so raw. So I sat on the couch replaying everything in my mind, the confrontation, the tears, the accusations. It had all spiraled out of control so quickly. An hour later, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Jake walked into the living room, his face still hard, but there was a slight softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He sat down next to me, and we sat in silence for a moment, before he finally spoke. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I reached for his hand, relieved that he was finally opening up. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," I said gently. "This is a lot to process. Just take it one step at a time." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I feel like everything I've ever known about my family is a lie. I mean, Matt's my brother, but not really. And my mom?" He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever forgive her for this." I squeezed his hand, trying to offer whatever comfort I could. "It's going to take time. You don't have to decide how you feel right now." He nodded, but I could tell the weight of everything was still crushing him. I just can't believe she kept this secret for so long. How do you even live with yourself after doing something like that? How do you look your kids in the eye and pretend everything's normal? I didn't have an answer for that. I couldn't imagine the kind of guilt Sharon had been carrying around for over 30 years. But the truth was, I was angry with her too. Angry that she had dragged me into this mess. Angry that she had lied to her family for so long, and angry that she had tried to manipulate me into keeping her secret. "What about Matt?" I asked after a moment. "Have you talked to him since we left?" Jake shook his head. "No, I don't even know what to say to him. He's probably just as messed up as I am right now. I mean, he's been living a lie too, and now he's got to figure out who his real father is, if that's even possible." I nodded, understanding his hesitation. "It's going to take time for both of you to process all of this, but you don't have to go through it alone." Jake looked at me then, his eyes searching mine. "Why didn't you tell me as soon as you found out?" The question hung in the air between us, and I felt a lump form in my throat. I'd been dreading this moment, knowing that it was only a matter of time before he asked. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I was scared," I admitted, my voice shaking. "Sharon put me in an impossible situation. She told me the secret and begged me not to say anything. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to hurt you." "But you did," Jake said quietly, his voice pained. "By not telling me, you hurt me more. Do you know what it feels like to find out that your wife knew this huge secret about your family and kept it from you?" Tears welled up in my eyes, and I wiped them away quickly. "I'm sorry, Jake. I was trying to protect you, but I realize now that I should have told you the moment I found out. I didn't handle it the right way, and I'm so sorry." Jake didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared down at the floor, his jaw tight. I could see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to make sense of everything. Finally, he let out a long sigh and leaned back on the couch, closing his eyes. "I don't know how to move forward from this," he said quietly. "With my family, or with us." My heart sank. "Us?" No. He opened his eyes and looked at me, and I could see the hurt still lingering there. "Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's over between us or anything like that, but this whole situation has made me question a lot of things, including our trust." I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. "Jake, please don't say that," I whispered. "I love you. I didn't mean to betray your trust. I didn't know what to do." "I know," he said, his voice softening a little. "I know you were in a tough spot, but this secret, it's like a bomb that's blown up everything, and I don't know how to put the pieces back together." I felt tears streaming down my face now, but I didn't wipe them away this time. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this," I said, my voice breaking. "I'll do anything, Jake. I don't want to lose you." He reached out and pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly as I cried into his chest. "I don't want to lose you either," he whispered. "But it's going to take time. I need time to figure out how to deal with all of this." We stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet of our living room. I didn't know what the future held for us or for Jake's family, but I knew one thing for sure. This secret had changed everything, and the road to healing was going to be long and difficult.